I would make this war so intense that the South would be forced to plead for peace. These are the words of Union General William Tecumseh Sherman, the very commander who would bring the Confederacy to its knees through his infamous march to the sea. The decisive triumph of the Union armies during the Chattanooga campaign in November 1863 sent tremors of dread through the Confederate forces, breaking their spirit as completely as a barrage of artillery and leaving them surrounded by the grim reality of their failure. So why was Atlanta the target? The Confederate command had intelligently utilized Atlanta as a cornerstone, capitalizing on its dual function as a key nexus for transport and a critical manufacturing base within their overarching war plans. Within the strategic deliberations of the Union High Command, an undeniable truth became apparent. The seizure of Atlanta would project an immense threat over the Confederate States, representing clear and present danger to their whole enterprise. The recently instated General-in-Chief, Ulysses S. Grant, gave General William T. Sherman control of the Western armies with the mission to take Atlanta and break the Confederate will to fight. But which commander would confront Sherman's path to Atlanta? It was Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston and the Army of Tennessee, supported by his officers Lieutenant General William J. Hardee, Lieutenant General John Bell Hood, Lieutenant General Leonidas Polk, and Major General Joseph Wheeler. Vastly outmatched, Johnston's operational philosophy was a fortress of deliberate care. His goal was to hinder Sherman's persistent progression by tactically arranging defensive stands and coordinating engagements to slowly erode the powerful Union troops. To Johnston's detriment, this method did not sit well with his fellow officers and superiors. Displaying strategic genius, General Sherman, with skillful precision, avoided head-on confrontations with Johnston's army, choosing instead to execute a series of flanking movements. Growing increasingly frustrated with Johnston's methods, General Hood aggressively advocated for him to assume a more offensive posture on the field. In a daring move outside the normal chain of command, Hood wrote directly to the government in Richmond, passionately condemning Johnston's conduct and describing him as both incompetent and lacking resolve. As defeats accumulated for General Johnston and the Confederacy, and with Sherman advancing ever nearer to Atlanta, Confederate President Jefferson Davis's patience expired. Finally, on July 17th, Davis removed Johnston from command, appointing John Hood as his replacement. This shift in leadership, however, was belated and would become a profoundly expensive error. The Army of Tennessee had already suffered severe casualties by this point, making it exceedingly difficult for Hood to secure any significant victory against Sherman's superior numbers. Compounding the troubles for the Confederates, Sherman vastly preferred Hood's impetuous military style over Johnston's cautious defensive strategy. The nature of the ensuing conflicts would permit General Sherman to fully utilize his numerical and firepower advantages, finally arriving at the gates of Atlanta. On the night of September 1st, General Hood ordered the withdrawal from Atlanta and directed the burning of railway cars carrying ammunition and other crucial military stores. The following day, September 2nd, Atlanta was taken by Union forces. On September 4th, General Sherman published Special Field Order 64, officially ending the Atlanta campaign. The city's capture greatly boosted Northern spirits and played a critical part in ensuring the re-election of President Abraham Lincoln. While garrisoned in Atlanta, the soldiers built their shelters, oversaw the relocation of most of the city's residents, enjoyed a period of rest, replenished their damaged gear, restructured their units, and carefully planned for their next operation. But what was the next objective for General Sherman after the fall of Atlanta? On November 12th, Sherman spent days systematically destroying every military installation in Atlanta, ensuring complete devastation, which included the essential rail lines. On November 15, 1864, the Army started its departure from Atlanta, moving in the direction of Savannah, thus commencing his march to the sea. Why was Savannah the destination? The selection of Savannah was based on its fundamental purpose as a major Confederate seaport, acting as a critical link for their international trade, which was necessary for maintaining their war capacity. Aware of Savannah's strategic value, Sherman was resolved to do anything to seize it, knowing that taking the city would edge the Union nearer to ultimate triumph. Deploying the total power of a devastating scorched-earth doctrine, Sherman began an unyielding offensive. His goal was not limited to military targets, but also included industrial capacity, public works, and the very foundation of civilian existence along the route to Savannah. Plunging deep into hostile lands, he and his resolute soldiers severed their own logistical chains, forming a bond with the wild countryside. This bold plan required foraging from local plantations to sustain the unending advance, with a dedicated purpose to wreck Georgia's rail systems, industrial base, and agricultural heartland. In the furnace of conflict, Sherman's drive for triumph went beyond traditional bounds, carving a permanent place in the annals of military history. On November 15, 1864, Sherman started the 37-day, 300-mile trek with a streamlined force of 62,000 men. In 1929, the British military historian B.H. Little Hart described Sherman's army as potentially the most skilled collection of military professionals in the modern era. He portrayed them as men skilled at providing for their own needs, able to march great distances with little exhaustion, fight with minimal casualties, and, crucially, perform with both speed and thoroughness. Sherman's force was organized into 2 wings and a cavalry division. On his right flank was the Army of the Tennessee, under the command of Major General Oliver Howard. On Sherman's left flank was the Army of Georgia, led by Major General Henry Slocum. Operating under Sherman's overall command was the Cavalry Division, headed by General Judson Kilpatrick. The cavalry provided assistance to both wings. Confederate Lieutenant General William J. Hardee was tasked with halting this efficient military machine heading his way. Unfortunately for Hardee, General John Bell Hood had tactically moved most of Georgia's defenders toward Tennessee in an attempt to lure Sherman into following. Worsening the situation, Hardee's command found it difficult to increase its combat strength, never exceeding a paltry 13,000 soldiers. From the beginning, the Confederate defensive operations were hampered by disarray, making it difficult to determine Sherman's precise line of march. Sherman's progress continued unimpeded until Howard's right wing faced stiff resistance in the Battle of Griswoldville on November 22, though the Union forces emerged victorious. By December 10th, Sherman's armies had reached the perimeter of Savannah. Hardee strategically fortified 10,000 troops in defensible positions, while also deliberately flooding the surrounding rice fields, leaving just a few narrow pathways leading into the city. Furthermore, Sherman encountered difficulties in connecting with the U.S. Navy to obtain provisions. To resolve this, Sherman dispatched cavalry to Fort McAllister, which protected the Ogeechee River, intending to open the path to the supplies aboard the naval vessels. The rapid end of the Battle of Fort McAllister on December 13th enabled Sherman to acquire the necessary supplies and heavy guns required for the assault on Savannah. Hardee, nevertheless, decided not to remain and capitulate. Instead, on December 20th, he elected to retreat and continue the struggle elsewhere, leading his troops over the Savannah River on a makeshift pontoon bridge. The next day, Savannah's mayor, Richard Dennis Arnold, formally surrendered the city to Sherman. This brought his march to the sea to a close, but Sherman's work was not finished. After a month of recuperation in Savannah, Sherman began a movement northward in what is referred to as the Carolinas Campaign. His objective was to complete his sweeping maneuver and combine his forces with Grant's to face Robert E. Lee and ultimately conclude the Civil War. Sherman's march to the sea, while celebrated as a masterwork of strategy, was not without its contentious aspects. The scorched-earth policies implemented by Sherman ignited intense disputes and created divided perspectives on the ethical and moral dimensions of military conflict. The intentional annihilation of civilian property, the plundering of towns, and the uprooting of non-combatants provoked anger among many, who challenged the limits of permissible action during war. Detractors contended that Sherman's merciless effectiveness overstepped ethical boundaries, inflicting avoidable hardship upon Southern civilians and staining the tenets of civilized combat. The debate over the march highlights the enduring conflict between military expediency and humanitarian concerns in warfare, producing a complicated legacy that historians and academics continue to analyze and argue. Sherman's audacious strategies, while successful in changing the war's trajectory, have persisted as a subject of ethical examination and historical contemplation. If you found this deep dive into Sherman's decisive campaign compelling, then you need to be part of our community. Subscribe to Rootvolutionary for more content that unpacks the complex strategies and figures that reshaped our world. Don't forget to like this video and hit the notification bell so you never miss a revelation. Until next time, keep questioning history.